All right, I think it's recording. Hello and welcome back. Sorry for the pause. And I've said this before. I think I said when I was talking about, when I was teaching on Daniel 10, there's a Daniel 10, 11, and 12 all go together. It's one visit. And if you missed Daniel 10, go back and listen to that before you listen to this. Because it's three parts of a visit, and they go together. And what I'm going to say today and talk about today won't make sense. I'll give you a quick review over it, but it won't make total sense unless you go listen to 10, because I make an argument. Like for instance, the first thing I want to talk about is I'm going to continue on the review is that I believe, and I bounce this off my pastor too, and we're in agreement on that the visitor who visits Daniel in 10, 11, and 12 is in fact Jesus. It's the Son of God. And if you go back and listen to Daniel 10 and look at the argument I made there, also look at Jeremiah 29:10, and God says, I'm coming. I'm going to see you at this particular time, which lines up with Daniel's 10, 11, and 12. And so, and I have to apologize too, it's super bright out here, but it's so glorious out here. Summers here in Washington State are spectacular. But anyways, I digress. So if you go back and you look at Daniel 10, and I'm going to go with that assumption that it's Jesus. And if you didn't catch Daniel 10, go catch it, and you'll see. I think I lay out a pretty strong argument. But Jesus touches Daniel three times, and the first time is he lifts him up. And honestly, and I said that last time, that is to see him face to face. And these three touches to me were just so, off the charts spectacular, in the sense that the fact that the Lord desires to see us face to face, and he lifts Daniel up. That's the first time he touches him. The second time he touches him, he touches his lips to allow him to speak. And the fact that God wants to hear from you and I, to me, is, like I said, it's off the charts. And that's the second time he touches him. He touches his lips in chapter 10. And the third time he touches him, touches him to strengthen him. And he strengthens him by smothering his fears in peace. And I was like, wow. And like I said, that was really cool for me. But that's a kind of a refresher for that. And let's see what else I got here in my notes here. What's interesting too. This chapter that I'm in today, and I'm going to break it up. I'm going to go to verse. I'm in chapter 11. I'm going to go to verse 32 because I believe there's a break in time, and I'll explain that when I pick up next time. But I'm going to stop at the end of 32 because there's a time break in chapter 11, and so I'll explain the time break next time a little bit more, which should be shortly here, because and here's the thing too, is I didn't really want to teach 10, 11, and 12 until I got the whole thing figured out. Well, I didn't get when I taught 10, I thought I had 11, 12 figured out. And then it's like, the Lord just keeps downloading truth to the point where I took pause and kind of examined all this stuff. And I was all ready to teach all of 11, and then the Lord said, "Why don't you stop it right here?" And just take a break. And so we're gonna do chapter 11, 1 through 32, and then the next time we'll pick up and finish up 11, and you'll find out if you look at chapter 12. It's a really short chapter, so we'll do that. And so back to what I was about to say was this particular chapter it's interesting that it's controversial. But people, and I say people, I'm just going to leave it as people. I'm not going to call them commentators or theologians or whatever. But people have a hard time with Daniel because this chapter is so accurate, so spot on for history, that people think the person after the time had to have written it. But there's a kicker in there that it couldn't be. But and here's the thing you got to keep in mind. I'm going to read this to you, this passage. I have to put my glasses on because I can't see it. Isaiah 46:10. This is talking about God. He's declaring the end from the beginning, and from the ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. And in that first part of that, it says, declaring the end from the beginning, and from the ancient times things that are not yet done. And that's what God does. And he's going to do that in this chapter here. And I want you, okay, I'm a history teacher, and how do I say this? Because I don't want to be derogatory and I don't want to be sarcastic. But when I teach history, I like to make it interesting, and I will bring in stories, and I will bring in, whoa, a little bit of wind there. I got to lose the hammock. I might need to move that. Or we'll see what happens. Anyways, that was just a breeze that came along. When I teach history, I won't teach it like is prescribed in Daniel 11 here, because it's just going to go blow by blow by blow by blow by blow, and there's some vagueness as to who the people are, but there isn't, and so it's not how I would teach history, and so bear with me as I go through this, and I'll pause, I'll read a section and pause and explain how it happens, but there's history just. Jesus flat out just lays it out. Hey, this is going to happen. 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 And so we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But bear with me through that. Daniel 11 is pretty deep when it comes to not really deep, but it's actually the opposite. It skims the surface and says, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. And so bear with me on that. All right. But so here's the thing I want you to keep in mind. As we go through these things, I just want you to think about two things, okay? Because don't get lost in the who's on first, what's on second, I don't know who's on third. Don't get lost in that. Think about two things, okay? What part does Jesus play in all this? If Jesus is telling Daniel, here's what's going to happen, why is he saying that? Why is it Jesus? Why is it Jesus the one who's coming and saying that? What does his authority have to do with the situation, okay? And so that's the first one. And the first question I want you to think about. The second question I want you to think about is, why lay out all the history? What gives here? Why is Jesus laying out the history? So what part does Jesus play, and why is he laying out all the history? So those are two questions we're going to come back to, circle back to. How's that one? For a common saying these days, circle back. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. And I apologize. It's a great day outside. I wanted to be outside, but it's super bright and I can barely see my screen. And so whenever I have to read stuff, I have to kind of like squint. So I apologize. Also in the first day, so I am in chapter 11, verse 1. Also the first year of Darius, the Mede, and let me pause. Keep in mind, if Jesus is in fact speaking, which I believe he is, and go back and please comment and let me know if you disagree and why you disagree. I'd love to hear those comments. But if in fact I'm correct and this is Jesus speaking, this whole chapter is red letter. I know I'm pretty familiar with the red letter, but in my Bible, in the New Testament, whenever Jesus is speaking, the lettering is in red, and it's to signify, hey, this is God speaking. So I do that in my notes too. I have this entire chapter in red because I believe that's Jesus speaking. So anyways, and it makes more sense too here. So anyways, also back to verse 1. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, I have to read this here. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his prosperity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others beside him. So This is Jesus speaking, and just it gives you that reminder. I like that very first verse. Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And keep in mind, Romans 13:1 says, "Let every soul be subject to the government authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed from God." Okay, so now it says in verse 2, it says, so there's this king, and then there's three more kings. Well, and then it talks about a fourth. And I'm not going to bore you with their names, but the fourth king is Xerxes. And Xerxes, you may remember him if you've seen or read the book 300 or seen the movie 300. That's Xerxes from Persia, who's going to go attack Greece. Okay, and so that's him that he's referring to. Okay, and then so he's telling, Jesus is telling right now that Daniel that, okay, you got four more kings in Persia, and this guy's going to go over and attack Greece, and that's going to bring about this mighty king. That mighty king is no other than Alexander the Great. And then his kingdom is going to be divided amongst four. And if anybody knows their history or remembers their history from way back when they took it, Alexander the Great, he has a kid, but it doesn't quite work out, or he's too young. I can't remember what it was. But he ends up he has four generals, and his kingdom is, when he dies at like 33, is divided amongst those four generals. Well, we are going to concentrate on two of those generals. The Ptolemy, okay, and so when you hear Ptolemy, I want you to think of Egypt, Ptolemy, Egypt, because you're gonna hear some common names. I think we go Ptolemy 1, Ptolemy 2, Ptolemy 3, Ptolemy 4. I think we go through four of them. I think I have it in my notes here. Do I have it in my notes? Yes, I do. Ptolemies, there's four of them, and that's going to be their name. There's no original thought here when it comes to naming. My wife loves to name things. We've had, whether it's our kids or whether it's our pets, she takes a lot of thought in naming and enjoys it. It's a creative gift that she has. And so, but you're not going to find that in this chapter. I'm sorry. Or I should say in history. In this history, you're not going to find it because there's Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Ptolemy the third, Ptolemy the fourth. Okay, come on, guys. Come up with some different names. And you're also going to see Antiochus. You're going to see, let's see, I think I have that in my notes too. Yeah, Antiochus 2, 3, and 4 are going to, okay, so the Ptolemies are Egypt, okay, and the other one that I want you to remember are the Seleucids, which are to the north. And so both of these kingdoms are going to, these two of the four of Alexander the Great's, these two kingdoms are going to bracket Israel to the north and to the south, because the Seleucid Empire is going to take pretty much just south of Turkey, north of Israel, south of Turkey, so modern day Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, okay, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. The Seleucid Empire is basically take the Assyrian Empire, Syrian, Babylonian, and Persian Empire, the three empires that had to do with the captivity of Israel. These three empires are the Seleucid Empire. That is the empire that is going to cause Israel the most grief. And I think that's kind of just ironic to me, because these are the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians. And so this is a Seleucid Empire, and you're going to see Antiochuses, and keep in mind, wait for Antiochus number 4. Number 4 is the dude who just messes up the temple and does bad things, okay? And so he's going to be the model for Antichrist that we talked about earlier. So he's Antiochus the 4th, so wait for Antiochus the 4th. So remember, as I said, the Ptolemies are Egypt, the Antiochus is the Seleucid, and the Seleucid's up north, and it's I look at it as the previous harassers of Israel, all right? And so they're up north. And there's going to be this tug of war with Israel in the middle, all right? And so this is, Jesus is setting up Israel. Be aware, you're going back to the land. And oh, by the way, things are not going to be the way they used to be. Okay, so I digress. Back to verse 5. Also, the king of the south shall become, and remember who the kings of the south were? The Ptolemies. Yep. Also, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of the princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So this is Ptolemy the first, and I may just leave my glasses on because otherwise, because I haven't read, which seemed like a great idea, but out here in this bright sunshine, I can't see it. Okay, so the king of the south, so that's Ptolemy the first. Okay, he's going to rise up, and one of his sons is Seleucus. Okay, he's going to rise to power. And he's going to be the first one. It's, like check, 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 check. He's the first guy who's going to take over Israel. And so the Ptolemies are the first ones to advance on the game of checkers here. Verse 6, and at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. She shall not retain the power of authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. Okay, so there's a daughter of the king of the south. So this is a Ptolemy daughter. Is going to marry the king of the north. All right, so far so good? Okay, this is Bernice. Okay, right now I'm going to tell you Bernice, and she is now we're to Ptolemy the second. Okay, Bernice is the daughter of Ptolemy the second. So Ptolemy the second's going to send his daughter to the north to marry Antiochus II. It's kind of like a peace deal, send that marriage. Okay, there's a huge problem here. Huge problem. Antiochus II is already married. Now, wait a second. What the heck? How did that happen? Okay, keep that in mind. He's already married. What about his first wife? You think, what happened to his first wife? Well, he just cast her aside. Not a good move. Okay, so Antiochus II takes Bernice, which is Ptolemy II's daughter. Okay, try not to get confused. I'll get confused all by myself. Well, his wife, Antiochus II's wife, is Laodice, or something like that. All right, and so he has this. He's cast her aside. Well, Ptolemy II dies. And so he's like, well, I kind of liked my first wife. And since Ptolemy II has died, the deal that I made is no longer going to hold. So I'm going to toss Bernice aside. He's had kids with her. Toss her aside and go back to his first wife. Well, first wife, when she gets in power, kills him, kills Bernice, kills all their children, and basically puts her son Seleucus II into power. Don't worry about these names, but I'm just saying. When we read the verses, there's names that line up to them, and it just as it happened, all those things that just happened. It happened, with poor Bernice. Anyways, so verse 7: from a branch of her roots. Okay, so the branch of her roots. So. One shall arise in his place, who shall come with the army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. So this is Bernice's brother. This is Ptolemy the third. Okay, Bernice's brother is going to go up to Syria and is going to humble Seleucus II. Okay, that was the daughter of Laodice, or that was the son of Laodice, which was the first wife of Antiochus II. All right, so don't worry. Like I said, there's no originality. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4. They're like, okay, come on, who's on first? What's on second? Okay, anyways, so a branch of her roots is going to have revenge, and in fact, he does. Verse 8: and he shall go also carry their gods captive to Egypt, and their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north, which is kind of like this nonchalant thing stuck in there, but he's going to continue more years than the king of the north, and he does. Ptolemy the third is going to die after Seleucus II. Okay, so this is it's kind of, once again, the history is spot on. verse 9. Also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but he shall return his own land. Verse 10. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through, and he shall return his fortress and stir up strife. Okay, so his sons, Seleucus II's sons, are going to stir up strife, all right? Okay, so Seleucus II has two kids, two boys, okay? And he's not big on naming them either. What's he going to name them? Seleucus II, one of his sons is going to be Seleucus III. And the other one's going to be Antiochus III, all right? So he has two kids, and they're going to be very successful generals, okay? And Antiochus III, remember, we haven't got the fourth yet. That's the key one you got to remember. Antiochus III, I read about him in history books and stuff, and he's an interesting cat. They called him, and he called himself Antiochus the Great, but I think somewhat worthy of that descriptor, although not. There's a caveat here. Antiochus III, they called him the Great, mostly because when you think, once again, that piece of property, the Seleucid Empire, he grew it, okay? And so he grew the empire, so he's called, Antiochus the Great, all right? And so he's the Antiochus III. So Seleucus II has two sons, which I was just talking about, and they're going to stir up strife, and that's Antiochus III and Seleucus II, the third. Okay, anyways. Verse 11, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given to the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. For the kings of the north will return and muster a greater multitude than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment. Okay, so we do have, there's several battles here going on. Antiochus and Ptolemy the Fourth now are going to have several battles. And so Antiochus, let's see what I got here, my notes here. Yeah, they're going to go back and forth with the Holy Land, Antiochus the Third and Ptolemy the Fourth. And eventually, it says, the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former. Antiochus the Third will invade Egypt and the armies of Ptolemy the Fifth. All right, so back and forth. And you have to understand, so just to give you kind of some history ballpark stuff, is that Antiochus the Third is in the same time frame as Hannibal. I don't know if you remember Hannibal. Hannibal's the guy who had the elephants, the war elephants that attacked Rome. He took them over through the Alps and such. That's Hannibal. And so you get Antiochus III and Hannibal actually fought on the same side again. And here's the other thing, too, to keep in mind, is Rome is starting to come onto the stage at this point. And that's why Hannibal and Antiochus are both going to fight Rome. Okay? And so, anyways. Verse 14, now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south, also violent men of your people, once again, this is Jesus speaking to Daniel, so your people are the descendants of Abraham. Also, violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mount and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. Okay, so when they're talking about your people there, you have to understand the Jews, the descendants of Abraham, actually did not like the Ptolemies, the Egyptians, and maybe an old grudge match from days of old of being in Egypt. So they don't like the Ptolemies, and they are actually going to side with the Seleucid Empire and Antiochus III. And so they're going to have him help them. And here you see, this is interesting too. There's a focus coming back to Israel, the glorious land. Verse 12. I'm sorry, 17. And he shall also set his face to enter this with strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall they do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. Okay, so give him the daughter of women. Okay, so Antiochus the third's daughter. Antiochus the third. Okay, so Antiochus, remember, Antiochus is from the north. So he's going to give his daughter, this is interesting too. I really didn't know this. I learned this. He's going to give his daughter Cleopatra, okay, to Ptolemy the fifth, okay? And he's doing this arranged marriage to basically put a spy in the land. He's going to put his daughter, Cleopatra. And this is Cleopatra the first, okay? So you have to keep in mind, this is not the Cleopatra of Mark Antony. That's Cleopatra the seventh, and which is kind of, like, this is the part I didn't know. I always thought Cleopatra was an Egyptian name because you always hear, Cleopatra in Egypt, okay? But the name comes from the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus is the third daughter, Cleopatra. He made an arrangement with Ptolemy the fifth, and to kind of get a spy in the land. Well, I'm proud of Cleopatra. She remained faithful to her husband, and didn't work out. When it says there, give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. Cleopatra the first does not side with her father. She sides with her husband, as it should be. Okay? And so, anyways, I thought that was kind of cool too. And like I said, this is not the famous Cleopatra. She's Cleopatra the seventh. This is Cleopatra the first. All right. So verse 18. After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and the reproach removed, and he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Okay, so it says here, after this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands. Okay, so Antiochus III is going to attack Asia Minor and Greece. Okay, and the Roman general Scipio, and there's two of them. They're actually the two brothers actually fight together. They're two famous brothers, famous Roman generals, and they both are going to end up fighting Antiochus. And what was it, like 5 battles? They fought like 5 battles, and Antiochus lost them all. And so there's and once again, we're dealing with this old history, and there was a historian, I think, that talked about it, where they actually, in Antiochus, he fights 5 battles against the Romans, and this is with Hannibal, and loses all of them. And at one point, he's captured, and they make an agreement with him. And I think in the story is something like they drew a line around him in the sand. It was on the beach or something, and they said, "Okay, here's the terms of your agreement. You either going to agree to those terms, or we're going to kill you. So step outside this line if you disagree, or stand within this line and agree to these terms." And so he stayed. And it was kind of interesting. I looked up the terms. Okay, this is Antiochus III. They forced him to do. There was 3 things essentially they had to do. First was they required a payment of him, and it's 15 to 20,000 talents. And I looked that up, 15 to 20,000 talents, and he had to pay it over several years. 15 to 20,000 talents is equivalent to $15 to $20 million over several years. So he's going to have to pay this huge fine over several years and because keep in mind, because the Ptolemies had made a pact with Rome, because Rome is expanding, and so they made a pact with Rome, and so that's how Rome gets into the picture here. So you got to pay the fine. I think this is cool too. He's got to give up his war elephants. So dang it, there goes his tanks. Had to give up all his tanks. And the last thing, which really kind of starts to hit home, we're starting to get into stuff we've talked about in the past, is he has to surrender 20 select hostages. The Romans get to pick, of course, 20 select hostages to go be taken and raised in Rome. One of them is his son, Antiochus IV. That's the guy that's Bad News Bears guy. Okay, so he's going to be one of the hostages they're taking away. So these are the penalties that he suffers. And so, and it says there, and then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land. And so this is how Antiochus III dies. Antiochus III, hard up for money, and this money, this debt is going to be carried over to his kids. We're going to find out here in a second. He's hard up for money, so the legend goes how he died was he went to I think it was somewhere in Babylon. He'd gone into his realm and attacked a temple to loot it because he's hard up for money, and the people from that town basically killed him, and so that's how he ends up dying. But don't fear. We already know he's got at least one son. Verse 20, there shall rise in his place one who imposes taxes. And remember, you're going to impose taxes because the dude has a debt to pay. Anyways, on the glorious kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So the one who's collecting, his son who's collecting taxes, is going to die. Anyways, but not in battle. Anyways, and in his place shall arise a vile person. Who do you think that is? To whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. With the force of the flood they shall be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. Okay, so it says there, one who imposes taxes. Okay, so his son is Seleucus. He has two sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus IV. Okay, Seleucus. Yes, I'm getting who's on first, what's on second. Seleucus III and Antiochus IV are his two sons. So the one who imposes taxes is Seleucus III. Okay, but we already said he's going to die, and he's not going to die in battle. Well, interestingly enough, in his place shall rise a vile person. Okay, so once again, historians believe that Antiochus IV, that vile person, killed his brother Seleucus III. Okay, and so historians record that. That's how Antiochus IV came to power, by killing his brother Seleucus III. All right, so and this guy's, if you remember back in Daniel 8, we talked about. As a matter of fact, go back and if you want to read Daniel 8:24 verses 25, read exactly like what we just talked about. All the same words are there. The holy people, deceit and prosperity, and prince of princes, and all that, and he shall act deceitfully. All that stuff is recorded in Daniel 8. And so, once again, so there's a continuation of the history keeping on. Verse 24, he shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the providence, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, the spoil, and the riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Okay, so Antiochus IV, I think he surrounds Alexandria, which is the capital. And what's going to end up happening, and I apologize if I'm somewhat distracted, there's an owl. I don't know if you can hear the birds. The robins will basically squeal on the owls when they're here. And so somewhere over there is an owl. Anyways, I digress. Squirrel. Anyways, so the Maccabees are going to force him to actually, he's going to go down to Alexandria. He's going to have it basically entrenched. However, the Maccabees are going to be causing some problems, and those are the Jews in Israel. And I think I've talked about them previously. That you have to understand the book of Maccabees did not make it into the Bible, but unless you're like the Catholic Bible, it's in the Catholic Bible because it was later adopted. And I've discussed it in the past, and the short version is it's a very interesting read. If you want to reference it, for more background on what Antiochus IV does to Jerusalem or to Israel. The book of Maccabees is great, but it's not part of the Bible. So it's one of those things where you kind of like, oh, it's a reference. It's a good reference, but I wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket, so to speak. And so the Maccabees are a group of people, a group of Jews that rebel against Antiochus IV and come to power in Israel. Okay, and so Antiochus IV is going to launch a second campaign against the south as well, as it talks about there. Hang with me, we're almost done. Sorry with all the first, second, thirds, and fourths. Verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter, for the ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved, and return in rage against the holy covenant, and do damage. So shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. And the forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary and the fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Okay, so so Egypt, this is part where I talked about earlier. Egypt is allied with Rome. And the ships from Cyprus that he talks about, that's spoken about here in verse 30, is actually the Roman fleet. The Roman fleet takes down his fleet. Antiochus IV had a navy, and so the Roman fleet beats him. Show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant, and that's in verse 30. Okay, and you have to understand, and once again, I think I talked about this earlier, I think it was in Daniel 8, that there's a lot of Jews who side with Antiochus. And you have to understand, let me pause for a second. Hellenization is the Greek culture that's kind of brought in. That was the culture of the day, was Hellenization. And Hellenization, with it came the Greek gods. And that kind of plays a part here too. And so you have to understand that there were some Jews who were adopting the Hellenistic culture, and along with it, they were abandoning their God. And there was a lot of them who, and of course, Antiochus rewarded those folks. And so that's what it's talking about here. Show regard for those who forsook the Holy Covenant. So there were those Jews who abandoned their God for the Greek gods. And he's going to place there the abomination of desolation. Okay, so once again, historians are a little bit divided on what this is. But it most likely, because of its, he's bringing in Hellenization, most likely, and I've read some historians that believe this, that he set up a temple to worship Zeus, which makes total sense if you think about it. If the Jews worship God the Father, well, not it's Yahweh, but they don't call him God the Father. We call him God the Father. If they worship Yahweh, who is God, then it would make sense to put the head figure in Greek gods as Zeus. So establish a temple to Zeus in the Holy of Holies, and he also slaughters a pig there too. So this is where it gets kind of interesting too. The whole thing is interesting. I digress there, but this part here, the abomination of desolation, is spoken of. And this is where you have to okay, people say, hey, Daniel didn't write this, okay, because it's too stinking accurate. There's too much history. That's spot on. He does a play-by-play of all the people that really happened. But here's the kicker. You get to this verse here, abomination of desolation. Have we heard that before? Yes, we have. We've heard about it in the New Testament, spoken several times. Okay, and guess when it's being spoken of, guess who's speaking about it? Jesus. This is in red letter. If you go look in your New Testament, Matthew 24, 15 through 16, it says, therefore, and this is red letter, this is Jesus speaking, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads this, let him understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay? And so I think this is just this is really cool. This is Jesus referencing himself, in a sense. He's crediting Daniel because it's in the book of Daniel, but when he shows up, as a man, he's quoting himself from when he visited last time with Daniel, and so I think that's kind of cool. Anyways, so this is Jesus quoting Jesus. All right, so this is where we're going to stop for today because. And I'll give you a short, quick version. Next time we pick up, no, I don't give you the short version. There's no way to give you a short version. Once I get started, I'm going to tell you this whole thing. But tune in next time, and I'll explain to you why I'm breaking at verse 32. The short version is there's a time break. At the end of verse 32, between 32 and 33, there's a huge gap. I'll explain that next time we talk. But I told you to be thinking about two questions when I first started, because we're going through a whole bunch of who's on first, what's on second. Two questions I wanted you to think is what part does Jesus play? Jesus is telling this history lesson to Daniel. Why is Jesus telling this? Why did the Son of God come to Daniel and tell him this? Well, I came up with two reasons. I think the first thing is to just to remind God's people that the rulers, or let me back up. God is reminding his people that he's in charge. He's doing it. He starts off right with verse 1. I strengthen him. Okay, and so these leaders who are being established by the King of Kings. God is telling beforehand, this is not by chance that this guy is in charge right now, and this guy's in charge, and this guy's in charge. It's not by chance. This is me calling the shots. Okay, so that's the first thing. And there's an interesting Revelation 1:5 reminds us of that. It says, Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler over the kings of the earth. So I think the first reason why Jesus is saying that is just to remind God's descendants that the rulers that come into play have been put there by God. Okay, that's the first thing. And then the second one too, and this one, I think it's just to allow the Jews to be at peace with bad leadership. Okay, and I got a verse here for that one too. Romans 13:1. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. And studying this portion of Daniel has really put me at peace with our current leadership in the United States, because I am, my friends as well are really distraught over this whole thing of like, hey, who's really in charge right now? Who's in charge? And I'm like totally at peace with this because of this right here. Jesus, he's in charge of history. He's in charge of putting the rulers there. And we have the toughest time because things don't seem right because of A, B, or C, or, how can we be on the losing team if God is on our side? And God is clearly laid out for Israel, for God's people, all these bad leaders. And one after another, there's not a good one in the bunch. And none of them look at Israel favorably. And none of them, even Antiochus III, who they kind of, helped bring in, he's not all that great either. And so he's bringing in Hellenization. All right, so that's the first question. What part does Jesus? And then the second question I asked you is, why lay out all this history in the first place? Okay, well, I think the first reason why lay out all this history is remind Israel that they're going back. And you have to keep in mind, when Israel left, they had kings. They were a kingdom with kings. And so God is reminding Israel, when you go back, it's not the same game as when you started. So I want to let you know right off the bat, which I think is kind of cool. If God let you know ahead of time that, hey, I'm going to send you someplace, but it's not going to be the way you think it's going to be. It's not going to be the structure that you think it's going to be. You're going to be powerless, okay? Even though you think you're going back and you're going to reestablish things the way you would like them, that's not the case. So that's the first one. Remind Israel that going back is going to look different politically. Um, the second one was just to build faith. Even when bad things happen, I think if you realize, you come to the realization that God told you ahead of time, hey, A, B, C, D. Watch it play out just like I called it. That's going to build your faith because you can sit back. And I think, quite honestly, the book of Daniel is more for the Jews in the end times. I really think it is because they can look back like I can right now with history, and they can go over the play and go, wow, God called it. God called it. And so it's a faith builder, I think. That's the thing. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. So the second reason was, I think, to build faith. The third reason, I think, is to establish a timeline, to not lose hope. And wait till we get to the next, when I finally finish the book of Daniel next time. There's this the way the thing ends is don't lose hope. Okay, here's how it's going to end, and don't worry, I got this. This is God saying, I got this. Don't worry. Here's how it's going to end. Okay, and just when you think all hope is lost, don't worry. When it looks like it's all about to just collapse in on you, don't worry. Here's it's so cool. I used to do this when I was a kid. I haven't done this in a long time. Is a book where it was really suspenseful and I didn't know how I was kind of like getting anxious. I'd go read the ending. I go, oh, okay, cool. But it's a spoiler. That's kind of a spoiler, really. That kind of ruins the whole book. But that's the way I was when I was a kid. I couldn't deal with suspense. If I had a book, I could just go to the end and read it. And so, but that's what this is. This builds hope because the ending is spelled out. And then, and so I think I have a verse for that too, John 16:33. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you will have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Amen. And so the last one that I had for you, I think for the 4 reasons why lay out all this history, is a warning to escape the coming wrath. And so you have to, once again, this one here is more for the last part of Daniel 11. The last part of Daniel 11 is going to jump into God's wrath. It's going to be the tribulation and God's wrath. And so I think that another reason for going through this history is to know that, once again, the 70th week, which we've talked about before, is a week where God pours out his wrath. And God would prefer that we skip that. Okay? He would prefer that we all skip that. So the fourth one is a warning to skip the coming wrath. And I have 1 Thessalonians 5, 2 through 4. But you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should not overtake you as a thief. Okay, what happened to my cursor? There we go. All right, so got some questions. Got some questions for you to ponder. These are the questions I'll leave you with. So first off, how does this prophecy of future leaders, this would be for the Jews back then, how does this prophecy of future leaders affect your view of modern day political leaders? I talked about mine. This gave me peace. Does it affect you that way? Do you take any comfort in looking at your leaders? And I would say both in your workplace and in your life and in your government. Are you okay with that leadership? All right. How does God being in charge and God setting these leaders in place, how does that play a part in you? And then I have second question is, throughout history of the Jews in the Promised Land, they are captive to the rule of non-believing rulers, held subject to their rule and their wars. Do we allow our faith to be weakened or subject to those in control of our environment? And so that was another thing too, is with all these leaders that came through Israel, did that weaken their faith or strengthen their faith because God had called it out. And it's kind of interesting. Being a history teacher, I've watched lots of documentaries, or read primary resources of Jews who went through the Holocaust. And what's interesting is I won't, I won't I won't give what percentage, but a great deal of them lost their faith because of the Holocaust. And so, do hard times, even when God's called it out, do we take those hard times, and do they increase our faith or weaken our faith? Um, this one I thought was interesting too. In the movie Arrival, I don't know if I just saw it the other day. It's 2016. Um, the alien language allows people to see the future. I thought that was kind of cool. I like sci-fis. So, a matter of fact, Louise, which is the lady, I don't know what her real name is, but the lady playing the lead role there, says, if you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things? She asked that of her future husband at the very end of the movie. Sorry to spoil it. So if you could see your, let me say it again. If you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things? And so that's my question I leave you with too, is knowing the future, and once again, keep in mind, because we've talked about the 70th week before, and that's going to be the end of Daniel chapter 11 that we're going to get into next time. Knowing the future, how does that change you? Are you going to change anything? Knowing that the time is short, does that change you? Do you live differently? Or are you just not ready for it to end, and so you're consequently not going to, I don't really want to think about that, so I'm not going to change. But hopefully it does. And I'm asking you just to think about that too. With God setting a timeline and setting a history, and when you look at the way things have played out, and so much of this has played out, and we're sitting on the cliff. I honestly feel the cliff of end times. I look at like what's going on with COVID and the requirements for folks to just blind obedience, mask up, shut up, vaccinate up. And there's this blind obedience to get people in line and to look at people who aren't vaccinated shamefully. There's a shaming going on being done by the government that I see in a totally different light. I see this as warm up for getting the mark of the beast, on your forehead or on your hand. This is a warm up for that, and it's the government trying these things out. It's part of the timeline, and do you think differently now? I do. I think totally different now. The book of Daniel has changed me. I look at my current president, vice president, administration, and I'm okay with it because I know the end is near. And how does that affect me? I approach situations differently. I look for God appointments. I look for opportunities to speak where God has put me. He's put me in this time, in this place, and for a reason. And you are here in this time for a reason. And if you have the Holy Spirit in you, and God's put you in a place where you have a terrible leadership where you work or whatever, it's okay. Be at peace with that. God put you there for this time. And so that's what I want to leave you with too, is just have your eyes open, have your ears open. Know that God's in charge. Have that peace in your heart. And let the Holy Spirit reign. And walk out and do the things that God has called you to do. Be that light that's set on high for all to give illumination to the whole entire room. Does that sound good? All right. Well, I'm going to end. That's where I'm going to end for here. Let me see if I can figure out how to shut this off. It's so bright out here. I can't see my screen. Anyways, so we'll end with that. And so God bless. Until next time, take care.